Yeah, I will say, oh, I'm sorry, back here. Yes, sir.
Earlier you were talking about a tall Bigfoot that had long black hair. In Chickasaw kind of like storytelling, and I'm Chickasaw, and my dad's Chickasaw all the way back now. In Chickasaw, we call Bigfoots Shampe, which means like the ones who skin, like, skin alive. And they're very like tall and skinny and stinky, and they have like long black hair, and they kind of act like how you described.
Yeah, Lyle Blackburn, I don't know if you're familiar with Lyle, but he is from Texarkana. He's done a lot of research into the southern Bigfoot and the Boggy Creek Monster and other reports of those. And his descriptions that he's gathered from eyewitness reports seem to think that the southern Bigfoots are more thin, tall, gangly. And he said it's, thinks it's because of maybe a product of the habitat, the warm swamps, swampy areas. They deal with, more, life may be a little more hard, a little more difficult for them to survive. And he said that's, southern Bigfoot seem to be a little more maybe aggressive or in a bad mood, which, if you had to live out in the summertime, with the mosquitoes and all that, and the heat, the humidity, I'd be in
Hunger.
a bad mood.
In a bad mood too.
Right. Yeah, and being hungry.
Yeah.
Yeah, trying to find enough to survive.
They're
Yeah.
hangry.
Right. Hangry. Yeah.
I was looking at, I did some research coming from El Reno back, I think it was maybe the 70s or 60s, of the El Reno Chicken Man.
Right.
Just I guess it was a Bigfoot's height. It wasn't very big, like 6 foot, maybe they said how big it was. But that he was raiding chicken coops and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So to go back to that, like I was kind of leading that, if there are different variations, do you think there's different subspecies of Bigfoot?
Possibly. Yeah. I mean, if they've hybridized or,
I mean, there's different races of people don't look the same, necessarily. So if people can look different, why can't they? But again, that's something that we really don't know. All we know about them is what's reported, and then I mean that's the whole deal. Is the person doing the reporting credible? There's all these things to take into consideration. But I think it's very. I mean, even like our speech, I have a hick accent. My friend from Massachusetts got that heavy Irish accent. Some people from Kentucky moved here, and I can't hardly understand a word they say. But they say, so you may have different dialects like that. Now, you were addressing a little bit on what they think these are. You got the DNA studies and all that. Now, you've got one school of thought, which I've met some of these people like Dr. John Bindernagel, Jeff Meldrum, and such. They're looking at this as like, they believe it's a remnant of an extinct Asian ape called Gigantopithecus. Okay, all we've got of that ape, and I talked to John Bindernagel about this when he was still alive, all I've got is a partial jawbone and a bunch of teeth. And those fit an orangutan pretty much to a T, except it's a lot bigger. So basically, from the fossil record, Gigantopithecus was a very big orangutan that went extinct some 100,000 years ago. Okay. How did anybody seen the hind foot of a great ape? Looks like a hand. Okay. If that is what that is, how did an Asian great ape migrate over the land bridge and in what is geological time, just a drop in the bucket, evolve into a completely upright humanoid with a human back foot? To me, that doesn't make sense. And another thing, can you cross an ape with a human? It's impossible. Kind crosses with kind. Now, I don't know about in the more southern tribes, but in the Pacific Northwest, up in like British Columbia, there are documented accounts of a Sasquatch abducting a native girl and making a baby with her. If those legends are true, Sasquatch would have to be a type of human. So that's something to chew on there. And somebody's telling me, yeah, but that was thousands of years ago. I said, no, the last woman that was abducted and gave stillbirth, she lived up to about the 1960s. And you can find pictures of her. So if that is true, they would have to be a type of human and not just some kind of great ape.
Wow.
Food for thought.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
We was talking about how they make you forget. This was in September of 18. She was coming home. I got home early, about 10 minutes to 5. Fell off the dip in the road. There was this, I always kid her, called it the red man. And walked across the road about 2 strides on a 24-foot road over to Temperate. This was probably a Tuesday. Just no kidding. It was like 2 days later before she told me. I'm like, how in the, we're a mile and 3/4 from home, less than 5 minutes. I said, how in the heck can you forget something like that? And she said, it just come back to me. She said, I just remember it was Tuesday. I mean, she crazy. I had her tested.
Not crazy, I was tested. I've not been tested, so I cannot say that. But anyway, I don't know, was you going to ask, is there anybody here that has an encounter story that they want to share?
In 1979, I was deer hunting right north of Cloudy, Oklahoma. Yeah. And my dad put me up in a deer stand. I was 18 feet up in the air. And he went around one edge of the mountain, and my brother went around the other. And this was, I got in there about 5, right before daylight and everything. And was listening, and I could hear something rustle behind me. But it didn't sound big or anything, so I just, wait till the sun came up so I could see it. And about at 8 o'clock, I started hearing steps. And as heavy as it was, I actually thought it was my dad coming back. And I could hear it walk towards the tree. And I was like, it's got to be Dad. So I start moving, and I can't see it, and I can hear it as it walks under the tree. And I said, Dad, what'd you forget? And I looked down, and this looked up at me.
Wow.
Yeah, I froze. I hadn't had a gun there, never thought about shooting this at all. But it looked up at me, and it kind of looked down, and it looked around, and it looked back up at me, and it looked this way, and looked up at me, and then huffed. And just kept walking. And it took me 10 minutes to get out of that tree, and until last year, I never gotten another deer stand. But I got a close-up look at its face. It did not have the patty face, with just that. The whole face it didn't have no hair. And it was red, reddish brown, long hair, hands hung down below its knees. I felt like it probably, if it wanted me, it could have just, So that was the first time.
Wow.
And that one has always, the eyes, those big eyes, have always stayed in my memory.
So the face, was it more ape-like, human-like?
The nose didn't look like an ape. It was flatter, but it was bigger than an ape's nose. The eye shape was human, very human. And like you said, they were all dark pupil, no white to it or anything, but it looked like it was thinking, And a wild animal, you run into that, it's just instinct. This actually looked like it was thinking, is there any more around, or,
Yeah.
That was the way I felt about it.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what color was the skin?
The skin was a light brown,
It looked fairly
like leather.
weathered.
Yeah. Yeah. Now this was in, November, and back then we always had snows before deer season and everything, so it was pretty cold. So, yeah, but that was amazing.
How tall would you estimate it? might have been?
Estimating probably 9 foot. Yeah.
When we take sighting reports and when we talk to people, when you see the emotion and you see how they're affected by it when they're telling their story and encounter, I mean, you begin to know that something happened. So it's
You
really
can tell by
interesting.
her voice.
Yeah.
Her voice changed when she was telling the story.
Yeah.
And
I'd investigated a report back years ago by a couple of off-duty police officers up by Grand Lake and those river bottoms behind that. And they had left all their stuff down there, sent somebody else after. They had face-to-face with one of these things. And I know whatever they saw, whether it was Sasquatch or not, it scared them out of there, because I went up there right away because I wanted to get to that area quick. And the one officer said, I'm not going back down there. And the other one went with me, but when it started getting closer to dark, he said, I'm not staying down here, and left me down there. And he showed me where the thing was. They had been camping, and they heard crawling like an armadillo in the leaves on the other side of this berm in the woods. They said, we're going to go shoot an armadillo. And they went walking around. They said this thing was on its belly. What they was hearing was it scooting up to look over that berm at them. And he said it just stood up real quick in front of them. And not to use the language, but he said, I said, what did you do? He said, I screamed like a blank and ran. Let y'all fill in the blank. And his friend that wouldn't go down there, he totally froze. And he said, I grabbed him like they showed us in Cleat to get our guys out of there. That guy froze. He grabbed him by the back of the shirt and dragged him out of there, and they left all their stuff down there. So, it's like, I didn't see the Bigfoot, but I seen their reaction to what they had seen, so. Anybody else?
I feel like it stands to reason, though, whenever you're talking about like the different builds and things. If you look at humans, we're the same, like Plains tribes were typically taller, lankier, more lean, because they traveled so much, they got taller. Whereas whenever you look at tribes or like peoples that settled down and started building like big structures, they weren't as tall and as lean. They were more, stocky, and I don't know. I feel like whenever you look at the south versus the north, it's more of like flat plains land versus like heavy forested areas, and that has to play some role, as well as the changes of season and possibly like how much body fat you need to have to survive certain temperatures or thrive in certain temperatures.
He went to college. He's smarter than me.
I learned to read.
But those are valid things. Yes, sir.
I was going to say, building on his, the deer down there are small. If you go down to Louisiana, the deer are a lot smaller than our deer is even here. You go up to the grain states, and of course they get bigger. They are. Crows don't sound the same in Louisiana. They're a different size than crows here. It's a pretty common thing among animals.
So yeah, it could be a factor of diet.
What are the common theories about what their calls mean? Is it like a warning, a mating? Are there any theories about what those are?
Well, did you want to take that or not?
I mean, there's lots of theories and guesses, but
calls, there are so many things out there, and I'm going to take for granted there's several people here that are pretty good identifying different animal vocalizations in the woods. I have heard online, even in a Bigfoot museum, somebody playing back a recording. One of the most common things attributed to a Bigfoot call is a red fox. How many of y'all ever heard a fox scream? That sounds like, that would get your attention if it's a while. The way a friend of mine that I go down the mountains with a lot from here named Brian Baker, and I tease him, he don't get out much. I said, man, seeing Bigfoot's more believable than somebody saying they see you. But we were down there, and we was hearing this screaming off in the distance, and we were like, wait a minute. And then later in the night, it was closer. It was like, oh, it's a fox. Coyotes. But then there's some things that you'll hear, and you're like, I'm not seeing a Sasquatch making it, but I don't know what that is. But what I have heard mostly is some different whistles and whoops type that. Now, if you go on the No Such Thing podcast YouTube channel, you can hear what Cornell recorded. He set a pretty expensive recording device off in the woods away from our camp, and he got a couple of pretty loud wood knocks, a whoop that was either a Sasquatch or somebody that hiked a long ways in the dark just to walk over a ridge and make a noise at us. But other than the tree knocks, when this was going on, we had knocks coming from that direction, then over here, and then down in the bottom of the ridge, something had picked up a couple of rocks and were clacking them together. And this was earlier in the evening before whatever it was come down and stood behind his tent, which he abandoned there. So, and I don't blame him. I mean, it was... But the first night we was there, he wasn't familiar with the the owl sounds and stuff we have here. And we got there the first night, it was like 11:30 because his plane was late coming into Dallas. And I'm getting stuff out of the truck. It's pitch black, and he's standing looking in the woods, and this owl just lets out this, wow, just right there. He didn't move, you know, he goes on like he's a scaredy cat. He's not. He didn't say a thing, he looked at me and goes, what the hell was that? I was like, well, that was an owl. But who knows, is it communicating to each other to let them know, hey, there's people here and really wish they wouldn't. Now, the closest thing to any type of aggression that I've ever experienced, and it was with my friend Brian Baker. We went down there investigating a sighting of a guy that broke horses for a living, was riding his horse back into this area, and one of these things walked out in the trail in front of him. He didn't even, he's like, I don't know what these are. He said, are they apes or what? I said, I don't know. But we were down there earlier in the day, we were hiking the creek fishing, and something was making these whistling calls. Didn't know what it was. Could have been, still could have been a bird. But late after midnight, we were both asleep. We were awakened by something heavy hitting a tree outside of camp. And just right about from here to that wall, from where we were sleeping in hammocks, at the time he had a hammock, I was on a cot, was a rock from the creek, apparently that big around, that had been thrown with force against that tree and bounced off of it. And we could see where it had dented in the tree. I could kind of pick the rock up. I couldn't throw it. So what could have done that? So it got my attention enough that I've been going back to that area for the past 20 years every chance I get and trying to document something. So, but I think if these things are out to get us, they're very bad at it. Okay, so I'm not where I carry a sidearm. So I said, oh, is that for a Bigfoot? It's like, no, it's in case some tweaker comes down here and thinks they're going to rob me. You know. So anyway, that's the most dangerous thing in the woods, actually.
Have you ever taken dogs out with you?
No, I like dogs. And historically, it's not like Harry and the Hendersons where you know, I mean, there's reports of them tearing dogs in half and stuff, and I don't want to do that to them. I like dogs.
Yeah, years ago, there's a lot of stories of coon hunters running into these things, and either the dogs get killed, or the dogs won't hunt, or they'll come back, or they just act strange when they encounter one of these creatures, or they'll back one into a corner, and the dogs end up getting torn up. So a lot of stories of those.
I tried to convince my wife to come along as bait, but no luck. Is Stacy still here?
Yeah.
My son's girlfriend. We didn't have to talk to her too.
Yes, ma'am.
Have either one of you seen any other cryptids while out?
Are there any other cryptids?
No, not are. Have you seen any?
No,
Or
I
any
said,
evidence?
are there any other
Are there?
cryptids?
I believe there
Okay, what do you got in mind?
are. You've heard of Dogman?
Heard of them.
Yeah.
People have asked me that a lot. When you're out in the woods, what do you think of Dogman? I said, don't think of it at all. I'm not, okay, to me, and this is not raining on anybody else's opinion on it, to me, if there's something like that, that's not a viable biological entity. So that would fit more into the paranormal realm, which is outside of my pay grade.
I've never seen anything like that. I hope I never run into one. The Bigfoot that I saw was scary enough. Although it wasn't huge like Patty, it was skinny, tall but skinny, and long black hair. We were up on a ridge in the Kiamichis, and along a logging road. My brother and I were on a logging road, and we saw it peek out when we were like, "Did you see that?" And he said, "Yeah, I saw that." And then it stepped to the middle of the road and the edge of the road. 1, 2, it was gone. Just that quick. But we did see, that night, later on, we did see orbs. We did see the small floating lights in the woods. My Choctaw friend that was with us said those were the little people. I don't know what those were, but they were floating lights. They looked about the size of maybe a softball or a little larger, and they were just kind of going through the woods.
What color were they?
white. They were white. I don't know what those were, but we definitely saw them. At first we thought maybe it was some people with flashlights. I said, "Do you see those two lights down there?" And he goes, "Yeah, is that?" And then when we told our friends, we said, "Here comes somebody." And he goes, "What?" And then as it got closer, we could see it was just two little floating lights, and it just went on by and down the creek. And I don't know. It was June, but it wasn't a lightning bug or anything like that. You know, it was bigger. I don't know.
You're in the woods long enough, you're gonna see some weird stuff.
Yeah, that's the weirdest thing. Yes, ma'am.
So, you mentioned that you're more into the camp of Bigfoot being flesh and blood, not paranormal. So I went to the UFO convention in Roswell this summer, and they briefly touched on the idea that Bigfoot is an alien. So where does that theory fall on your spectrum?
Well, I think they get that idea because there are a lot of sighting reports. I don't know how many from Oklahoma, but there are a lot of sighting reports in the West of UFOs being seen in the same area where there's also Bigfoot sightings. So I think that's where that comes from. But
To look more into that, there's a gentleman in, I believe it's Pennsylvania, named Stan Gordon. They actually called that connection the Pennsylvania effect because back in like the 60s and early 70s, there were a rash of Bigfoot and UFO sightings that were very simultaneous in an area there in Pennsylvania. And it all happened like just right there. And Stan Gordon, he's still alive and active. He's in his 70s, I think. But you know, the older I get, the less that sounds old anymore. Anyway, but if you look up Stan Gordon, he's the person I know that's really looked more into that. So, I have no idea though. Is it just coincidence, or do we have Chewbacca? You know, so I don't know. You said one of the names in the Seminole, I think, for Bigfoot said something about to forget.
Yeah.
There was a guy that was on a Bigfoot bill that said that as well. He was from Wewoka, a gentleman named Pear Bowlegs.
It's actually, he's a cousin of mine.
Oh, is
He's
he?
in a historical.
So that's what I was kind of curious about. So yeah, he named off a lot of different names, and it seemed like the names that he was giving described an attribute of the thing, like did it have some kind of power to make people forget they even saw it? I know I've talked to some people that have given me encounter reports that wish they could forget. So.
I do have a dogman story I could tell you. Poo-poo it if you want to. It is what it is. I lived in Daugherty for a time.
Daugherty?
Yeah, Daugherty.
Is that how it's said?
I say
I've
Daugherty.
been saying it wrong my whole life.
I think it's Daugherty.
Daugherty. Yeah.
Darty.
Okay. And so my daughter was bored one Saturday night. She was around 14, and so I do have a little mono or a night vision, the monocular night vision first generation, yeah. And so I told her, I said, well, we can drive out on this hill and look at the stars. Maybe we'll see some satellites. And so with her, just her vision, she was able to see a satellite, but then she said, wait a minute, do satellites zigzag around? I said, no, you're seeing something else. And so I had to get the night vision, and I finally saw what she was talking about. And yeah, there was a little dot up there just zigzagging around all over the place. And so she was already bored with that. It's time to go back to the house. And I said, all right, I'm going to scan the tree line here. And as I was scanning in some tall weeds, I picked up some eyeshine. I said, hey, come here, look at this. I think it's a Bigfoot. And so she's looking through the night vision, and she said, I see its ears. I'm going to get back in the truck. I didn't understand what she meant. I thought she meant she sees its ears. So she said, you need to come and get in the truck too. And I said, well, I want to see what happens. I think if I keep walking toward it, I'm going to get to see it jump up and run away. So I'm walking towards it. I finally get as close as from here, I guess to that window. And then I see its ears. It had two ears on top of its head, just like a German Shepherd's. Exactly like a German Shepherd's. And my Generation 1 night vision is putting out a laser beam. And so I've got it right on its face, and its eyes are squint shut. And so I dropped the laser beam down, and its eyes slowly opened up. Oh man, that's when my heart went in my throat. and it's laying in the weeds, and all I could see was the head, the ears, the eyes slowly open, and there was a forearm that had some, it's like it had stripes and some spots, which to me was like a hyena when I looked at illustrations online. And I could tell the body was big, but I couldn't tell any shape or anything. And so I'm trying to walk backwards, looking through my night vision because I didn't want to lose it. And I'm walking backwards, and finally I had to turn to see where the truck was, and then, oh, it's still there, good. And so I get in the truck, and I told my daughter, yeah, I saw his ears. She said, I tried to tell you, you're so stupid. And I said, well, I want to let that slide, because I think you're right. And the next day we drew pictures, and just to compare, and we drew exactly the same thing. So I was impressed that she saw what I saw. Cool? All right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Someone mentioned the Chicken Man story. Is everyone familiar with the Chicken Man stories from El Reno, Concho? When somebody says Chicken Man, you automatically think of a giant chicken or something like that. But the reason it got that nickname was because, and it's funny how a lot of the names for these creatures, it's from newspaper people. They make up a name and then it sticks. And so anyway, there was reports of one of these creatures raiding a farm on the river there where they raised a lot of chickens, and it got in there and killed a bunch of the chickens, ripped the doors off the hutches, and evidently it cut its hand on one of the pins, the doors, and there was actually a door there with a bloody handprint and blood splatters all over it. The El Reno Police Department collected that and took it to the director of Oklahoma City Zoo at that time and had him look at it. He said it's a primate type print, but it's not like anything we have here. It's not gorilla, it's not chimpanzee, it's not anything, but it was a huge handprint. But anyway, so since it was eating chickens, they nicknamed it the Chicken Man. So.
Though there may actually be a giant chicken.
So with all the game cameras around, why do you think?
That is a very good question.
That is a good question. We had that one game camera picture here, but they just seem to be able to avoid whether they smell the camera, whether they hear the movement inside, because these things click whenever they see the infrared flash, but they seem to be able to avoid them. Don't know. And I've heard it said that, like when I go hunting and I put my trail cameras out, then it's kind of like their living room. It's like someone would come and put something in your living room. You would notice it right away. Oh, they're.
Well, there are animals that they pretty much shown that can see in an infrared spectrum. I mean, how many of y'all set game cameras out? I mean, we all do. How many times have you got a picture of a deer just staring right into where that infrared is? So, they're pretty much shown that. So, a couple of possibilities. They kind of sense what it is and avoid it. Or maybe they're just not there. That's a big thing too. I don't mean not exist, but I mean just in the area. So